Well, Allan Fels, long after his role ended as chairman of the ACCC, has been a champion of consumers and of competition policy. He says the decision to allow Qatar to double its flights into Australia should have been a pretty straightforward and easy one for the government. Separately, he's also agreed to head up an inquiry into price gouging created by the ACTU. And Allan Fels joins me now from Melbourne. Allan, many thanks for your time as always. Is this an own goal by the government, not allowing Qatar to make these extra flights, these extra 28 flights that they wanted to?
Well, prices are about 50% higher than pre-COVID. And by not letting Qatar in, the prices will stay up at that level. If Qatar came in, they'd fall 20, 30, 40%. And to block them is to block competition. And to boost Qantas's profits, they don't need those profits. They made $2.5 billion last year. Their own profit forecasts are very optimistic regarding the future. And so the whole restrictions are very anti-competitive, and they're a very bad start for a government which has just said it's going to review competition policy.
OK, so market power can be sort of abused or used in different ways. Is one way the way in which you can exert power over the government, that you can influence government to keep competition out?
That's exactly right. Imagine that Qantas had somehow arranged to do it privately. Maybe they pressured Sydney Airport, hypothetically, to block Qatar. That would have been a breach of the competition, or they would have been fined. But they got the government to do it for them instead, and the government's exempt from the law.
So that being the case, Allan, can I just ask that quite clearly this works in Qantas interests at a time, and the argument from Catherine King, the aviation minister, was, or the transport minister, well, we're protecting Qantas jobs. Do you need to protect jobs when the unemployment rate is just 3.6%?
No, you don't. That's a really bad argument, because if it protects Qantas jobs, it's at the expense of other jobs that would be created by Qatar coming into the industry. Tourism jobs, the spending that the extra tourist does. Also business, freight costs go up, and that's bad for them and for their jobs.
OK, so you would have heard Alan Joyce over the past week or so. We interviewed him, basically saying that, well, Singapore Airlines is bringing extra capacity in. China Southern is bringing extra capacity, more capacity than what Qatar wanted to bring in. Is that an argument for Qantas to say, well, you can keep Qatar out? What other reasons would there be for not wanting those extra Qatar flights?
Well, this is a complete red herring, bringing in flights to Singapore and to China and so on, because hardly anyone's flying there these days. The big demand is on the Europe and US route, not the China route. OK, so then take me to the next phase of this, and that is prices that are artificially higher than they otherwise might be, because somehow the competitive market has got out of whack. That's happened in airline prices, but that's also what you're investigating on behalf of this study by the ACTU. That's right. See, a basic point which you're sort of getting at is that there's a lot of discussion about inflation, and it's all about everything but prices themselves. It's about interest rates, monetary policy, government deficits, wages, everything. What about actually having a look at prices themselves, what they are, how they're set, are they too high, are they directly contributing to inflation over and above any cost increase there might be? That's the idea behind the ACTU-sponsored price inquiry I'm doing.
But there's a balance here, isn't there? Because let's say, for example, if we genuinely opened to competition, we'd open ourselves to imports, allow more cheaper imports into this country. But then the ACCC would argue you've got to be careful of that because that could come at the cost of Australian jobs. Where do you sense the balance is there?
Well, I mean, in the report, I'll say what I think. I don't necessarily expect the ACTU to agree to it, and they probably don't expect it either. So, on the whole, the history of import restrictions has been that they've pushed up prices a lot to the extent that people haven't brought products. So, there's a false belief in the 80s, 90s that high tariffs protected jobs. But they don't, because they put up prices and people buy less, and therefore there's less demand for workers.
So then I've heard even the Energy Minister in the last couple of weeks say that he's thinking that maybe there should be additional tariffs on some imported goods, such as steel, such as aluminium, such as cement, on the grounds that overseas products would be made with sort of carbon fuels, gas, coal, whatever it might be. Australia would be making it with green and more expensive energy. Is there an argument there, or is that something, again, Australia's going to be careful of?
Look, I'd be very wary of that type of argument being protectionism disguised as a kind of pro-green policy. I do want to say that it's great if we're doing pro-green things in terms of things we're making, using renewables and so on. So I just want to weigh up a couple of things, but always very wary when a policy for one reason is used to reduce competition or imports.
Okay, one final thing for you. A couple of weeks ago, you said that companies that exert power in terms of their pricing or their competitive position should be broken up. Is there a legal framework in Australia for companies to be broken up that abuse their market position?
We'd have to change the law, and the law would be that courts can break them up if they've acted in a very anti-competitive manner, and if the best and only solution is to break them up rather than fines and warnings and that sort of thing. But in the US, divestiture, that's the name for it, has worked really well in breaking up oil, cigarettes, chemicals. The telephone revolution was brought about by a breakup of AT&T.
I'll tell you what, Allan, it's always good to have in the program. Allan Fels doing that inquiry into prices and competition, and many thanks for your time on the program today.
Thank you, Ross.